The planet was still called Blue Planet, and nations, schools, cities, technology, and ordinary human life still existed, but everything had changed after strange forces descended upon the world. Ghosts, monsters, undead creatures, mysterious realms, and supernatural disasters had become part of reality. Humanity had adapted by developing an awakening system. When young people reached the proper age, they could awaken a profession and step onto a completely different path in life. Some professions were meant for combat. Some were support professions. Others specialized in crafting, healing, ranged attacks, defense, magic, or exploration. The profession a person awakened would influence what skills they could learn, how they could grow, and even what kind of future society expected them to have. And in Heiken High School, the day every student had been waiting for finally arrived. The awakening ceremony was held on the school grounds. A large platform had been prepared, surrounded by glowing formations. Students gathered in lines while teachers watched from the side. At the center stood the combat class instructor, Lu Hu, a broad-shouldered man with a heavy beard and the intimidating presence of someone who had seen real battle. He reminded everyone that awakening a profession was directly connected to their future. Today, these students would stop being ordinary teenagers and begin stepping into the world of professionals. Among them stood Fang Zhou. Fang Zhou was a freshman at Heiken High School, but his story was already unusual before his awakening even began. He had transmigrated into this world many years earlier. He had grown up here, learned its rules, attended its schools, and lived the life of an ordinary student while waiting for the same day everyone else waited for. He was also an orphan. His parents had died as martyrs, and because of that history, teachers knew his name. Fang Zhou himself had excellent grades and strong physical fitness. He was handsome enough that several girls in the crowd were already quietly discussing what profession he might awaken. One girl guessed he might become a priest. Another agreed, joking that becoming a priest would suit a face like his perfectly. Not everyone was impressed. A blonde student named Lu Renjia stood nearby with his friends and dismissed the attention Fang Zhou was receiving. In his view, looking good meant nothing. Once awakening began, a person's profession would speak louder than appearance, reputation, or grades. Someone immediately accused him of being jealous. Fang Zhou ignored the chatter and stepped toward the awakening altar when his name was called. He placed his hand on the awakening device. At first, the reaction was enormous. Golden light exploded upward. The formation around the platform shook. Energy rose like a pillar connecting heaven and earth, and the crowd went silent. Even the teachers were startled by the scale of the phenomenon. For a moment, it looked as though Fang Zhou had awakened something extraordinary. Then the golden brilliance changed. Dark green energy spread through the air. Shadows formed behind him. Ghostly figures, skeletal warriors, undead creatures, and enormous deathly silhouettes appeared inside the swirling aura. The system announced the result. Fang Zhou had awakened the profession of necromancer. For a few seconds, people were impressed simply because necromancer was rare. Then laughter began. Several students started mocking him. In their understanding, necromancers were among the weakest combat professions. They looked intimidating because they could summon undead creatures, but their long-term development was considered terrible. The reason was simple. A necromancer needed a close connection to the undead realm. Yet living humans belonged to the world of life, while the undead realm represented death. Life and death were naturally opposed. Because living people had almost no reliable way to study the undead realm deeply, the profession lacked a complete training system, reliable advanced skills, and a stable route toward higher ranks. A rare profession sounded impressive, but if no one knew how to develop it, rarity did not automatically mean strength. Fang Zhou looked at his initial status. Name, Fang Zhou. Profession, necromancer. Rank, apprentice, lower. Strength, 1. Constitution, 1. Agility, 1. Spirit, 2. They were ordinary beginner attributes, aside from spirit being slightly better than the rest. The crowd saw only a disappointing necromancer. Fang Zhou saw something else. A completely different system activated in front of him. Congratulations to the host for awakening the Undead Realm Experience System. Fang Zhou froze. He had spent 18 years in this world waiting for the kind of advantage that transmigrators in stories always seem to receive, and now, on the day of his awakening, his so-called golden finger had finally arrived. The system automatically established a connection with the undead realm. Then it created something even stranger. A skeleton clone. The skeleton clone existed inside the undead realm and could explore that world in Fang Zhou's place. It could fight undead creatures, consume the power they left behind, improve its attributes, gather soul power, and eventually provide benefits to Fang Zhou himself. Fang Zhou could experience the clone's senses as though he were controlling another body, and the creatures defeated by the clone could potentially become resources for his necromancer abilities. Most importantly, the system solved the exact problem that made necromancers weak. Other necromancers struggled to understand the undead realm. Fang Zhou had been given a body that could live inside it. He almost wanted to laugh. If any ability had ever been tailor-made for a necromancer, this was it. The skeleton clone took shape in a deathly wasteland under a red sky. It was taller and more imposing than an ordinary skeleton, with blue flames glowing inside its eye sockets. Dark cloth hung from its body, pieces of crude armor covered parts of its frame, and red cracks of energy ran between its bones. Fang Zhou could feel everything through it. That realization came with a warning as well. The clone was not a completely disconnected game character. Damage, exhaustion, and pain could affect Fang Zhou's real body through the system. Exploration would give him enormous opportunities, but it was not without danger. Back at the school, the ceremony continued. Lu Hu called the next student, Bai Xiao-chan. Before moving on, he looked at Fang Zhou with a trace of regret. Fang Zhou had excellent grades and strong fundamentals. Lu Hu had expected a combat profession with obvious potential. Necromancer was not the result anyone had predicted. Several girls approached Fang Zhou afterward and tried to comfort him. They told him the profession still looked cool. One even joked that perhaps he could become some legendary crown-level necromancer someday. The attention only made Lu Renjia more irritated. He had awakened an assassin-type profession, and instead of simply walking away, he decided to prove that Fang Zhou's new skeleton was nothing special. Without properly warning him, Lu Renjia launched a hidden projectile skill, a silent sleeve arrow, directly toward the summoned skeleton. The assumption behind the attack was obvious. A beginner necromancer's skeleton was supposed to be slow, fragile, and stupid. Breaking it would embarrass Fang Zhou immediately. The skeleton moved before most people could even react. It dodged the projectile. Then it struck back. Lu Renjia was smashed aside so quickly that the surrounding students barely understood what had happened. Humiliated, he turned his anger toward Fang Zhou himself. A purple blade formed in his hand. He rushed forward, believing that even if the skeleton was unusual, the necromancer controlling it would still have the weak body of a mage. Fang Zhou caught the attack. Then he punched Lu Renjia away. The crowd went silent again. For a supposedly weak necromancer, Fang Zhou's physical strength was already strangely difficult to explain. Fang Zhou did not bother explaining it. That night, he turned his attention fully toward the undead realm. Through the system, he inspected the skeleton clone. Clone, skeleton. Rank, apprentice, lower. Strength, 1. Constitution, 1. Agility, 1. Spirit, 1. Equipment, none. Skill, skeletal armament. Instinct, skeleton race instinct. The skeleton could use bones as material to strengthen itself or forge simple equipment. Soul power, 0. Fang Zhou immediately understood the first problem. The clone had no proper weapon. Before he could solve it, the undead realm solved the problem for him in a more violent way. A pack of red-eyed undead wolves appeared through the smoke and rushed him. Chapter 2. Controlling a second body sounded simple until Fang Zhou had to do it while being attacked from several directions. The wolves came fast. The skeleton clone tried to move, but Fang Zhou's coordination through the unfamiliar body was rough. Its foot tangled at the worst possible moment, almost sending the skeleton to the ground while claws and teeth closed in around it. Fang Zhou immediately realized that the undead realm was not going to give him time to practice peacefully. The wolves circled. One lunged. The skeleton barely avoided being torn apart. Fang Zhou forced himself to focus. There were bones scattered everywhere in this world. If skeletal armament allowed a skeleton to use bone as material, then he did not need to find a normal weapon. He could make one. Bones gathered into the clone's hands. Under the influence of the skill, they hardened and reshaped into a crude weapon, part spear and part blade. The next wolf attacked. This time, the skeleton slashed it open. Another wolf came from the side. Fang Zhou turned, thrust, and drove the bone weapon through it. The pack did not retreat. More wolves rushed in, forcing the clone into a chaotic close-range fight. The skeleton took damage. And in the real world, Fang Zhou felt it. Pain shot through his body. Injuries experienced by the clone were reflected back through their connection strongly enough to make him understand one thing very clearly: if he treated the undead realm like a harmless training simulation, he would regret it. Still, danger also meant resources. When undead wolves fell, their remains became material. Fang Zhou used the bones from the corpses to reinforce the clone's equipment. In his mind, the principle was almost poetic. If this was the world of death, then death itself could serve him. After one of the kills, a small blue flame appeared above a corpse. The skeleton's instincts reacted immediately. Hunger. Fang Zhou did not know exactly what the flame was yet, but the clone wanted to consume it. He let it. The blue flame entered the skeleton. Its attributes increased slightly. Strength rose. Soul power appeared for the first time. The improvement was small, but the meaning was enormous. The system explained that soul power could be used to deduce skills, improve potential, and enhance equipment or abilities. That changed Fang Zhou's entire plan. He no longer wanted to simply survive in the undead realm. He wanted to hunt. He forged a more reliable bone spear and began searching for weaker undead creatures. Before long, he encountered the most common inhabitants of this region, ordinary skeletons. They were low-level apprentice creatures. Their intelligence was poor, their bones were fragile, and their greatest weakness was the soul fire burning inside their skulls. To Fang Zhou, they were perfect targets. The skeleton clone charged into them. Bone struck bone. Spears shattered ribs. Skulls cracked. Blue soul flames were absorbed one after another. The clone's statistics slowly rose. Strength climbed toward 3. Constitution and agility improved. Spirit increased. Soul power accumulated until Fang Zhou had roughly 10 points available. The growth was not explosive, but the direction was clear. Every enemy was experience. Every corpse was material. Every soul flame was fuel. The only problem was that Fang Zhou's real body still had to attend school. After spending too much time connected to the clone, he returned to class looking visibly injured and exhausted. Bai Xiaochan noticed immediately. She looked at the marks on Fang Zhou and misunderstood the situation completely. Since everyone had been mocking his profession, she assumed he had become depressed enough to hurt himself. She seriously told him not to do anything stupid just because people looked down on necromancers. Fang Zhou stared at her for a moment before realizing what she meant. He quickly told her it was only a scratch. Inside, however, he made another rule for himself. Entering the undead realm in public was too risky. If injuries could suddenly appear on his real body while other people were watching, someone would eventually notice that something impossible was happening. Bai Xiaochan reminded him that meditation class was about to begin and suggested he visit the infirmary first. Fang Zhou refused. He said he was fine. The system also gave him a warning. Spending too long experiencing the clone's body could negatively affect his physical condition. He checked himself again. His own attributes had already improved slightly from the clone's progress. Strength was around 1.2, Constitution around 1.1, Agility around 1.1, and Spirit around 1.1 beyond its initial base progression. More importantly, his Necromancer skill list contained summon skeleton and a special indication that a skill could be deduced or developed. That last part excited him more than the raw numbers. Necromancers were weak because they lacked a complete skill system. Fang Zhou's system could create one. Chapter 3. Meditation class was taught by Shen Hongyu, a red-haired woman with a witch-like hat and the aura of a proper mage. She was a silver-rank lower-stage fire mage, and unlike the students, she had enough experience to explain why meditation mattered. Every profession had its own methods of visualization and mental training. Proper meditation increased spirit, improved control, and laid the foundation for using professional skills. The problem was that visualization was difficult. Most beginners needed time just to form the first complete mental image. Shen Hongyu told the class not to feel discouraged if they failed on the first day. She herself had needed around half a month before properly entering the state when she was a student. Fang Zhou opened the basic meditation method for necromancers. The system immediately detected it. Skeleton meditation method. Apprentice level. Entry stage. The method required him to visualize a skeleton and use that image to gradually strengthen spirit. For an ordinary necromancer, forming a perfectly detailed skeleton in the mind might be difficult. Fang Zhou literally had a skeleton clone. He used the clone as the model. Bones, joints, soul fire, posture, movement, the shape of every part of its body, there was nothing vague for him to imagine. He could observe it directly through their connection. The visualization formed almost immediately. Then Fang Zhou noticed an even more ridiculous advantage. Why should only his real body meditate? The clone existed continuously inside the undead realm. If the clone could sit and practice the same mental process when Fang Zhou was not actively fighting, then his equivalent training time could become far longer than that of a normal student. Instead of meditating a few hours a day, his system could potentially keep the process running almost around the clock. The system reported an improvement in spirit. Once he had recovered enough, Fang Zhou returned to the undead realm and resumed hunting. During battle, another notification appeared. The clone's instinctive skeletal armament ability had reached a level that could be converted into a usable main body skill. The system offered to perform a deduction for 10 soul power. Fang Zhou accepted. A new skill appeared. Bone Javelin. Apprentice level. Proficient. The skill condensed bone into a projectile and launched it with great force. It dealt physical piercing damage together with death energy damage. The quantity, range, and power of the projectiles would improve with spirit and skill proficiency. The system also displayed possible branches of development around it: bone shield, giant bone claw, bone prison, and other bone-based abilities. Fang Zhou suddenly understood what his future skill tree might look like. He tested bone javelin immediately. A skeletal creature and its skeletal dog became the unfortunate targets. A bone projectile formed and tore through the enemy with far more power than Fang Zhou expected from a beginner skill. Compared with common low-level necromancer attacks such as death missile or ray of enfeeblement, the destructive force was excellent. But after repeatedly killing ordinary low-level skeletons, the system rewards began shrinking. A kill that had once been useful now produced only a tiny amount of growth, sometimes around 0.05 of the relevant reward. The message was obvious. The system would not let him farm the weakest monsters forever. If he wanted real progress, he would need to move deeper into the undead realm. Back in class, Fang Zhou quietly thought about his new skill and accidentally smiled to himself. Shen Hongyu noticed. She asked what was so funny. Before Fang Zhou could answer, Lu Renjia jumped in and mocked him again, suggesting that Fang Zhou was probably laughing because he could not even perform the basic necromancer meditation properly. Other students joined the discussion. Everyone knew necromancer meditation methods were incomplete and harder to learn than the standardized methods of common professions. Shen Hongyu did not mock him. She encouraged Fang Zhou to keep trying. Then the conversation turned toward Lu Renjia's progress. Lu Renjia proudly announced that he had already visualized roughly a third of the weapon required by his assassin meditation method. He had managed to form the handle of a knife in his mental image, and considering this was still the first class, he clearly expected everyone to admire him. Fang Zhou looked at him and casually described that progress as average. Lu Renjia's pride immediately exploded. If Fang Zhou thought one-third was average, then he should demonstrate something better. Fang Zhou did. He entered meditation and produced a complete skeleton visualization almost instantly. The classroom went silent. Shen Hongyu stared at him. Students who had just been discussing how difficult necromancer meditation was could only watch as Fang Zhou completed the very thing they believed should have taken far longer. Lu Renjia had spent the class bragging about one-third of a knife. Fang Zhou had completed an entire skeleton. Chapter 4. The following week became a cycle of meditation, school, and hunting. Fang Zhou pushed himself hard. The clone fought inside the undead realm while his real body continued practicing meditation. The constant spiritual strain eventually gave him headaches, but it also produced results. A system notification informed him that his professional level had improved and the clone could be strengthened further. At school, Bai Xiaochan saw how terrible he looked and asked what he had been doing all week. Fang Zhou gave the safest answer possible: training. She clearly did not believe that ordinary training alone explained his condition, but she did not press him too far. The other students were still talking about his necromancer profession. Some continued treating him as a curiosity. Others openly mocked him. Bai Xiaochan defended him whenever the comments became too annoying. Lu Renjia, meanwhile, had learned a proper combat skill and was eager for revenge. He formed a dagger and challenged Fang Zhou. Before another stupid schoolyard fight could begin, Lu Hu stepped in. The combat instructor reminded them that professional skills existed to fight ghosts and monsters, not classmates. He shut down the confrontation and then turned toward Fang Zhou. Lu Hu had heard about Fang Zhou's meditation result. Rather than treating the necromancer profession as a dead end, he told Fang Zhou he expected him to put the same effort into combat training. That small moment mattered. Fang Zhou realized Lu Hu had not given up on him. Soon afterward, the class began a practical strength test using a training golem. The golem was designed as an apprentice-level benchmark for attack and defense. A value of 100 represented roughly the force of a weak Abyss Imp's claw attack. For common combat professions, a score around 60 was already respectable for a new student. Reaching 100 or breaking the golem would earn contribution point rewards. Students stepped forward one after another. A fireball produced a score around 48. A crippling strike produced roughly 41. A petrifying arrow reached around 50. Those numbers established the normal range. Then Lu Renjia took his turn. His hidden assassin profession, Phantom Assassin, gave him a stronger offensive skill. Phantom Dagger struck the target and produced a score around 80. Lu Renjia immediately looked satisfied again. Then another student stepped forward. Yefan. Yefan had awakened the Demon Hunter profession, a profession connected to a far more developed combat system. His weapon resembled a large blade bow that could transition between ranged and close combat. He used Vengeance Strike and other chained attacks. The first heavy hit reached around 65. A follow-up combination pushed the score to roughly 88. Then the final sequence reached 100. Lu Hu announced Yefan's result. The class reacted exactly as expected. 100 was the benchmark everyone had been told represented true apprentice combat strength. Fang Zhou, however, noticed something else. The golem's damage counter was cumulative. If enough attacks landed, the total could keep climbing. And if the test object could actually be broken, then a summoner did not necessarily need one enormous attack. Quantity could become its own kind of power. Chapter 5. Yefan's result made him the obvious center of attention. Lu Renjia was not happy about that either. He complained that Yefan's score depended on combining multiple strikes instead of one clean attack, as though that somehow made the result less valid. Bai Xiaochan pointed out that an assassin who lacked good combinations probably should not complain about someone else's combo. Then it was her turn. Bai Xiaocan's hidden support profession was not designed for heavy damage. She used a green string-like attack skill and produced a score of only around 31. She immediately complained that support professions really did have miserable direct damage. Lu Renjia laughed at her. The test continued. Gu's Haiku, a storm mage, used a chain wind energy missile and reached roughly 72. Zhao Yuan, an earth knight, used shield armor impact and scored around 69. Chen Yong, a heavy hammer warrior, smashed the target with giant hammer impact and reached around 84. Finally, Fang Zhou was called. Lu Renjia started mocking him before Fang Zhou even moved. He suggested a necromancer might not even reach 20. Fang Zhou looked at him and asked whether he was certain Fang Zhou could not earn the 20 contribution point reward tied to the result. Lu Renjia doubled down. Fang Zhou asked the surrounding students to move farther back. His skill needed space. Green death energy spread across the testing area. 10 skeletons appeared. The crowd reacted immediately. A new necromancer normally should not have been able to summon so many creatures. Some students wondered whether Fang Zhou had somehow already reached Black Iron rank. Others remembered the famous necromancer Suzinian, who had reportedly been able to control only around 5 skeletons at a similar stage despite her extraordinary background. Even Lu Hu stared carefully. If Fang Zhou could summon 10 immediately after awakening, then his talent might already exceed what people considered elite for the profession. Fang Zhou knew the truth was even more ridiculous. 10 was him holding back. The skeletons attacked the golem together. The counter climbed. 30. 45. 60. 65. Lu Renjia started laughing again, convinced Fang Zhou had reached his limit. Fang Zhou calmly asked a question. If 10 skeletons were not enough, what about 20? More summoning circles opened. 20 skeletons attacked. The counter raced upward. 91. Then over 100. The golem broke. Its scoring system glitched beyond the expected maximum while pieces of the target crashed to the ground. Fang Zhou picked up the broken head and carried it toward Lu Renjia. Earlier, Lu Renjia had talked far too confidently about what he would do if Fang Zhou succeeded. Fang Zhou handed him the ruined head as though presenting a meal and reminded him of his own words. Lu Renjia suddenly discovered that he did not want to follow through. Fang Zhou told him to disappear. Humiliated again, Lu Renjia left while promising revenge. Bai Xiaochan immediately asked how Fang Zhou had improved so quickly. He gave the same answer as before, ordinary meditation. Lu Hu praised him. Fang Zhou responded with a dry joke rather than giving away anything useful. Then Lu Hu mentioned something more important. The seed list. Heiken High School had around 10,000 freshmen. Of them, 9,103 had successfully awakened professions while 897 had failed, giving the school an awakening rate of roughly 91%. Among the successful students were 85 rare professions. The school selected only 100 students for the seed list. Those students would receive extra resources and development opportunities, but they would also carry greater responsibility. The principal's office reviewed the strongest candidates. Names such as Zhao Yuan the Earth Knight, Bai Xiaochan with her support profession, Gu's Haiku the Storm Mage, and Yefan the Demon Hunter naturally appeared in the discussion. When Fang Zhou's name was raised, the principal initially rejected it. His reasoning was the same argument Fang Zhou had heard since awakening. Necromancers had no future. Chapter 6. Lu Hu refused to accept that answer so easily. He argued that Fang Zhou deserved consideration based on actual performance, not the reputation of his profession. The principal explained his position more carefully. Necromancers possess theoretical potential, but theory did not solve the practical problem. Without advanced skills, proper training systems, and access to the undead realm, most necromancers would eventually hit a wall. Suzinian was the obvious exception people always mentioned, but she had a legendary father and enormous resources behind her development. The principal asked the question directly. What did Fang Zhou have? Lu Hu knew exactly what Fang Zhou had lost. He had known Fang Zhou's parents. They had been comrades and heroes of the Federation. Fang Zhou did not have a powerful family standing behind him anymore. That made Lu Hu even more determined that the school should not dismiss him. He reminded the principal what Fang Zhou had already done. He had completed skeleton meditation during his first class. He could summon more than 20 skeletons almost immediately after awakening. The principal's expression changed. If those facts were true, Fang Zhou might not simply be a talented necromancer. He might be someone capable of pushing the profession in a new direction. Still, the principal wanted more evidence. He decided Fang Zhou's performance in the upcoming simulated battlefield test would determine whether he deserved a seed position. Outside, Bai Xiaochan was still bothering Fang Zhou about the number of skeletons he could summon. Fang Zhou insisted it was only a few extra. Bai Xiaochan told him there was a point where excessive humility stopped being humility and became arrogance. Fang Zhou laughed. Then Yafan appeared. Yafan wanted to challenge him. Fang Zhou was not interested in another dramatic rival speech and treated the whole thing like childish second-year syndrome behavior. Yafan changed tactics. He explained that a demon hunter research group wanted a necromancer as a sparring partner. If Fang Zhou participated for around 2 weeks, they would provide room and board and pay him 10 contribution points. Fang Zhou immediately shook his hand. Bai Xiaochan stared at the sudden change in attitude. 10 contribution points was real money in this world of professional resources. She explained that Yefan could afford to throw those points around because the Demon Hunter Research Association was supporting him. In a sense, he was a rich second-generation professional spending future resources now. At his current rate, she joked, he might spend decades after graduation paying everything back. Fang Zhou found that extremely funny. The group went to a research facility. There Fang Zhou met Chen Qingshan, head of the Demon Hunter Research Association, a silver-rank Gale Ranger. Chen had greenish hair, glasses, a mechanical arm, and the calm pressure of someone who had survived real combat. He explained why so much investment had gone into Yefan. Inside an Abyss Mystic Realm, a senior demon hunter had once advanced all the way to the legendary crown level and killed an Abyss Lord. That achievement proved the profession had enormous potential, so Heiken Military Academy and related organizations had created programs to develop the next generation of demon hunters. Chen Qingshan even suggested establishing a necromancer research group around Fang Zhou. Fang Zhou declined. Research support sounded useful, but research also meant people watching him closely. His system and skeleton clone were secrets he had no intention of placing under a microscope. The sparring setup included safety safeguards. Fang Zhou received standard apprentice equipment from the armory and began studying Yefan more seriously. Yefan was fast. His burst damage was high. He could shift between ranged and close combat quickly. Fang Zhou used the system to review his own abilities. His status had improved to around Strength 1.5, Agility 1.3, Constitution 1.3, and Spirit 2.5. He possessed the Soul Split status created through the clone connection. His skills included Skeleton Meditation, Summon Skeleton, Bone Javelin, and Bone Shield. Bone Javelin had already reached a high degree of mastery, and Bone Shield was becoming reliable. The standard apprentice staff he received slightly increased spell effects. The apprentice robe slightly reduced incoming damage. Yefan equipped his blade bow. Looking at Fang Zhou, he confidently declared that 20 skeletons would not be enough. The spar began. Chapter 7. Yefan moved first. The blade bow made him dangerous at every distance. He could fire, charge, slash, and reposition almost without pause. Fang Zhou immediately understood that his first priority was maintaining distance. Yefan launched demon hunting arrows. Blue projectiles curved through the field and disrupted Fang Zhou's summoning rhythm. One summon was partially interrupted. Fang Zhou had to dodge rather than complete it cleanly. More skeletons appeared, but Yefan's arrows pierced through them. From the observation area, Chen Qingshan and Lu Hu watched closely. Chen was already impressed. Even if Fang Zhou lost, his performance was good enough to justify serious attention and possibly a seed list position. Lu Hu told him to keep watching. Fang Zhou was too calm. That meant he still had something hidden. Yefan switched into close combat and used Fierce Strike. Skeletons were cut apart. Fang Zhou stopped pretending 20 was his limit. 30 skeletons appeared. The researchers watching the fight went quiet. This was only days after Fang Zhou's awakening. Yefan's expression became serious rather than frightened. He finally felt he had found a rival worth fighting. But Fang Zhou could tell Yefan was preparing something. Yefan deliberately cleared space, then used Shadow Charge to close the distance directly. Observers immediately thought Fang Zhou had made a mistake. A mage-type profession caught at close range by a demon hunter should have been finished. Yefan unleashed Vengeance Fierce Strike. Fang Zhou told him he had taken the bait. A giant structure of bone formed between them. Bone shield. The attack crashed into the shield and stopped. Everyone watching reacted at once. This was not one of the standard necromancer skills they knew. Fang Zhou had created it himself. Then Ye Fan realized something even worse. The person he had been chasing was not actually Fang Zhou. During the chaos of the skeleton swarm, Fang Zhou had used cloth and positioning to create a disguised skeleton that looked like him. At the same time, the real Fang Zhou had hidden among the skeletons. It was a double deception. Ye Fan had committed his attack against a fake target. Now he could not easily identify the real one. He understood the tactical problem immediately. The longer the fight continued, the worse his position became. Fang Zhou could keep using numbers and confusion until Ye Fan's stamina and spirit were exhausted. So Ye Fan decided to end everything with one attack. Skyfall Strike. Green energy erupted across the battlefield in a massive area of effect attack. The strike descended over Fang Zhou's skeleton army. Chapter 8. Skyfall Strike tore through the battlefield. Skeletons shattered. Green energy covered the area. The figure everyone believed to be Fang Zhou was swallowed by the attack. Ye Fan, breathing heavily, asked whether the medical team was ready. He still possessed enough pride to worry that he might have overdone it. The observers did not answer the way he expected. Their expressions were strange. The damaged figure on the ground shifted. A skull showed beneath the disguise. It had been another skeleton. Ye Fan finally understood the full trick. Fang Zhou had not simply hidden once. He had created layers of misdirection, letting Ye Fan believe he had discovered the fake while the actual Fang Zhou remained somewhere else entirely. The surviving skeletons closed in. The real Fang Zhou appeared and casually thanked Ye Fan for letting him win. Ye Fan had no good response. He admitted defeat. After the fight, one of Fang Zhou's skeletons helped support the exhausted Ye Fan. Ye Fan awkwardly thanked the undead creature. Fang Zhou gave him an encouraging thumbs up, which somehow made the situation more embarrassing. Ye Fan then started delivering a dramatic speech about failure becoming fuel and how he would remember this defeat for years. Fang Zhou immediately told him to calm down because he had only been joking. Chen Qingshan praised Fang Zhou's battle awareness and tactical control. Fang Zhou dryly commented that the praise somehow did not sound like praise. Lu Hu cared about something else. He asked directly whether Bone Shield was a skill Fang Zhou had created himself. Fang Zhou admitted it. Then he added that he had created another one as well, Bone Javelin. Both Lu Hu and Chen Qingshan stared at him. A student who had awakened only days earlier had already developed 2 usable necromancer skills. Lu Hu became so excited that he started patting Fang Zhou on the back far too hard. Fang Zhou asked his teacher to be gentler before the congratulation itself became an injury. Chen Qingshan wanted to test the 2 skills properly. Fang Zhou pointed out that his spirit was nearly empty after the fight. Lu Hu produced a box of spirit recovery potions. Then, instead of carefully sipping one, he opened a bottle and drank it like someone pouring draft beer down his throat. Fang Zhou stared at him and asked whether that was really how these expensive potions were supposed to be consumed. Then he copied him. Once his spirit recovered, the testing began. Bone Javelin produced an attack value around 85. Bone Shield produced a defense value around 80. Lu Hu immediately compared the numbers with standard professions. Bone Javelin had offensive power comparable to a Storm Mage's beginner attack, while Bone Shield approached the defensive performance of an Earth Knight. In Lu Hu's view, Fang Zhou had been born to become a necromancer. Fang Zhou asked him to stop patting him before everyone assumed the test numbers were being padded by teacher enthusiasm. Chen Qingshan then introduced Fang Zhou to something that could completely change the value of skill creation. The skill repository. The Federation maintained a central collection of professional skills. Professionals could spend contribution points to exchange for skills stored there. More importantly, anyone who developed a new useful skill could upload it and receive contribution points. If other people later exchanged for that skill, the original developer could continue receiving a percentage of the revenue. Fang Zhou immediately saw the opportunity. He entered the repository and uploaded Bone Javelin and Bone Shield. The system evaluated them. The reward was enormous for a new student. 200 contribution points immediately, plus 50% of future exchange fees generated by the skills. Fang Zhou had just created passive income. While exploring the repository, he also examined the limitations of the basic skeleton meditation method. His own system reported that 100 soul power was available for further deduction. The next stage of his development was already waiting. Chapter 9. Fang Zhou spent soul power to improve skeleton meditation. The result was a new method. Skeleton Monarch Meditation Method. Its meditation efficiency increased dramatically, roughly doubling the speed of spirit growth, and it also strengthened the effectiveness of undead-type skills. That solved one problem while revealing another. Spirit remained Fang Zhou's greatest bottleneck. His summons, bone skills, clone experience, and long fights all consumed spirit. If he wanted to keep increasing his combat time, he needed better recovery. Inside the skill repository, he found a skill called Presence of Mind. It cost 20 contribution points. The passive portion improved spirit recovery. The active effect could temporarily restore or reserve spirit during combat. The skill was known to be difficult for beginners to learn. Difficulty meant very little to Fang Zhou's system. He spent 10 soul power and directly brought Presence of Mind to the entry stage. Then he began buying reference skills, not because he intended to use all of them normally, but because they could become material for future deductions. He spent around 60 contribution points on abilities such as Vine Entanglement, Swamp Spell, Earth Wall Spell, Spider Web Spell, and Ray of Enfeeblement. Each skill represented a mechanic that might later be converted into an undead-style ability. He also bought a Mage Apprentice equipment set for roughly 40 contribution points. The hat increased maximum spirit. The necklace improved recovery. 2 rings reduced skill cooldowns. Wearing all 4 pieces granted a set effect that increased cultivation and skill proficiency speed by around 10%. Fang Zhou checked his growing status again. His core attributes remained around Strength 1.5, Agility 1.3, Constitution 1.3, and Spirit 2.5 at that stage of his real body progression, but the skill list had expanded rapidly. Skeleton Meditation had evolved toward the Skeleton Monarch path. Summon Skeleton, Bone Javelin, Bone Shield, and Presence of Mind were all available, and his equipment now supported continuous spell use far better than before. The clone also needed better combat skills. Fang Zhou purchased Weapon Mastery, Block, and Battle Cry, spending roughly another 30 points. Only after the shopping spree did he look at his remaining contribution point balance and feel pain. 200 points had looked like a fortune. Professional development could consume a fortune very quickly. He immediately began thinking about more paid sparring sessions. When he returned to the research group, Chen Qingshan asked how his visit to the skill repository had gone. Fang Zhou called it a huge harvest. Ye Fan, meanwhile, had recovered enough pride to demand another rematch. He offered Fang Zhou a spirit recovery potion before the fight, claiming that this time he understood Fang Zhou's tactics. Fang Zhou handed the potion back and suggested Ye Fan keep it because he might be the one who needed it. Ye Fan did not appreciate the confidence. But Fang Zhou had another reason to accept the match. Extra sparring meant extra contribution points. Ye Fan paid. The fight began. This time, Ye Fan did not waste time testing Fang Zhou slowly. He opened with a strengthened Skyfall strike. Fang Zhou responded by summoning an even more overwhelming mass of skeletons. The Skeleton Monarch meditation method and his improved spirit efficiency made the entire army more dangerous than before. Ye Fan quickly discovered that understanding the old strategy did not matter when the opponent's raw ability had improved again. The skeletons swarmed him. The fight became less like an elegant duel and more like a public beating performed by a crowd of undead workers. Ye Fan's most desperate concern eventually became his face. He shouted at the skeletons not to hit it. They did not show much sympathy. From the side, members of the research group joked that Ye Fan might not be able to train properly for a week after this. Chen Qingshan once again suggested building a dedicated necromancer research group around Fang Zhou. Fang Zhou once again declined. Elsewhere in the skill repository, Fang Zhou's uploaded skills were attracting attention. A striking red-haired woman examined Bone Javelin and Bone Shield and realized that the person who created them had approached necromancer mechanics in a completely different way. To her, the developer was not simply talented. The skill suggested that the entire profession might possess more development potential than people believed. Chapter 10. The red-haired woman continued studying the newly uploaded necromancer skills. She was Suzinian, a necromancer from an influential family and someone already associated with the profession's rare success stories. She tested the skills herself and became increasingly excited. Bone Javelin and Bone Shield were practical, efficient, and far more useful than the stereotypical weak beginner skills available to most necromancers. She hurried to speak with her father. 2 new necromancer skills had appeared in the skill repository, she told him, and she wanted to know who had created them. Her father was surprised as well. Suzinian demonstrated the abilities and explained that she had learned them personally. The actual performance was excellent. Then she made a declaration that stunned him even more. She wanted to take the developer as her master. Her father had to explain the awkward problem. The person who created the skills was not an old necromancer researcher or a hidden master. He was still a student. At almost the same time, Fang Zhou's teachers were arguing about his future again. Lu Hu returned to the principal and once more requested that Fang Zhou be added to the seed list. Chen Qingshan also supported the recommendation. The principal still worried about the same long-term problem. A necromancer might perform well at the beginning, but where would the profession find enough advanced skills later? Strength without a development path could still end in a dead end. Lu Hu and Chen Qingshan now had a simple answer. Fang Zhou had already created 2 necromancer skills by himself, and their measured intensity was excellent. The argument against his future was becoming harder to maintain. Back in class, another smaller drama was unfolding. Ye Fan appeared again and challenged Fang Zhou yet another time. Fang Zhou looked at him as though trying to remember how many rematches they had already fought. Ye Fan insisted this one was different. Over the previous few days, he had been training with Bai Xiaoqin's assistance. Bai Xiaochan had recently comprehended a support skill called Lullaby. The name sounded harmless, but the effect was extremely useful. Lullaby accelerated spirit recovery and increased the effectiveness of meditation or training. It could only be used around 3 times per day, which made each use valuable. Ye Fan had been paying Bai Xiaochan roughly 2 contribution points per week for the opportunity to receive the buff during training. Fang Zhou silently wondered whether Ye Fan intended to spend his entire future paying off professional development debts. Ye Fan, however, was confident. Bai Xiaochan explained that the buff did not simply help recovery. It could also improve the efficiency of meditation and training over time. Fang Zhou immediately noticed something more interesting. If Lullaby affected meditation and the clone shared parts of his cultivation system, could the support effect influence the skeleton clone as well? He asked Bai Xiaochan whether she could use the skill on him. She agreed. The soft support energy wrapped around Fang Zhou. Inside the Undead Realm, the skeleton clone reacted too. The system displayed a lullaby status. Fang Zhou smiled. Very good. The buff could affect the clone. That meant Bai Xiaochan had unintentionally given him a new way to accelerate Undead Realm training. Instead of immediately taking Ye Fan's rematch seriously, Fang Zhou shifted his attention to the clone. The Undead Realm was becoming more dangerous as the skeleton moved away from the beginner area. A stronger skeletal enemy appeared wielding a heavy mace. Fang Zhou treated it as the perfect test target. Bone Spear formed. The enemy attacked. The clone used block and weapon mastery to control the exchange rather than simply relying on raw numbers. It parried, countered, reversed the angle of the weapon, and used its new combat techniques together with skeletal armament. The clone's equipment continued evolving from defeated enemies. Bones were converted into stronger armament. Its ability to fight like an actual warrior improved rapidly. The most important difference was efficiency. With the new skills and lullaby support, every fight became more profitable. Kills produced noticeable gains again. Strength increased by small but meaningful amounts such as 0.11. Soul power increased by around 0.55 from suitable enemies. Fang Zhou realized the combination of support buffs, higher level targets, and proper combat skills was accelerating the clone far more than mindlessly killing weak skeletons. And there were still huge numbers of undead creatures ahead. The clone looked at the surrounding enemies and decided there was no reason to fight them one at a time. Battle Cry activated. The skill was an apprentice-level combat buff. A powerful roar temporarily increased strength, constitution, and agility. The duration and magnitude depended on the user's strength and proficiency. A visible ring of force burst from the skeleton. The undead around it turned toward the noise. The clone practically invited the entire group to attack together. The battle became a slaughter. Weapons crashed. Bones shattered. Soul fire was absorbed. Small system gains appeared repeatedly as the clone grew stronger while still fighting. Then the battlefield changed. The clone sensed something completely different. A massive figure appeared above the ordinary undead. Huge skeletal wings spread from its back. A glowing golden halo floated over its skull. In its hands was an enormous sword. The system identified it as a bone angel. Fang Zhou stared through the clone's eyes in disbelief. A boss had appeared directly in what was essentially the beginner region. Chapter 11. The bone angel did not wait for Fang Zhou to finish being surprised. It descended with its giant sword and smashed the ground. The clone barely avoided the impact. Fang Zhou immediately understood that a direct hit could destroy the skeleton. Even its improved defense was not enough to casually trade blows with this enemy. So he chose aggression. Battle cry translated in some combat notifications like a war cry strengthened the clone again. Bone Spear formed. Weapon mastery and the system's combat deductions turned the fight into something more technical than a simple exchange of power. The clone used armor breaking and limb targeting variations, attacking joints, arms, and structural weaknesses rather than the Bone Angel's heavily protected center. The Bone Angel parried. The clone blocked. Heavy impacts shook both bodies. At one point, the clone managed to damage one of the Bone Angel's arms badly enough to reduce its effectiveness. Fang Zhou knew that without that earlier damage, several later blows would have been strong enough to shatter the clone outright. During the exchange, he finally saw the